So during the course of 2021, Abdul and I have been working on a new textbook for a really exciting course that Pearson have introduced on the history of migrants in Britain in a period of over 1,000 years, from the Vikings right the way up to the 21st century. And this kind of thematic, long view of history is really challenging for students to have a picture in their minds about. And Abdul and I wanted to find a way of conveying visually what kinds of change happen across maybe 200, 300 years. So the course is divided into 4, and for each of those 4 sections, there is a double page that shows a visual impression of the big picture of history.
Yeah, and we went with a timeline. It might not necessarily be the most imaginative concept in and of itself. However, the timeline itself is perhaps the most useful device for teachers to convey, the span of time.
But how would we wanted to show that timeline in a bit more of a creative way, didn't we?
Absolutely. And so we tried to overcome another one of the difficulties that we preempt students would have, and that is to see the changes alongside the period of time that we're describing. So we went with what we termed a migration highway, a road as a timeline in a sense. And on that road, we had the key individuals that had been described in the chapters labeled. We had sort of physical features on the road to represent key events, turning points in this case, or a bend in the road to convey a major change. And we also added another sort of feature which we thought would be very useful for students to get a sense of the spread of migration, didn't we?
Yes. So at one point we were thinking of making the road expand and contract, and that became really difficult to visualize, and I think students would have found that confusing. And so our designer came up with this really good idea of putting dots along the highway to try and indicate the change in volume, so that and lots of kind of graphs and stuff do that, where something's more intense, you get more a more concentration of color. So each dot was for each of the 4 sections, they have their own color. And then the dots on the highway represent the intensity of the migration. So for instance, in the Middle Ages, there are very few dots along the highway. There are some periods where you get a few more dots, but the intensity is not there. Once you get to the 19th century, so what the highway shows the 18th and 19th century, and it's so obvious that the 19th century is filled with lots of dots. And then you get towards the end of the course, and so when you get into the 21st century, you've got lots of dots on the highway around about 2000 up to 2016, when you had a lot of migration coming through the European Union. And then, of course, we get Brexit, and then the dots start to disappear, although we know that hasn't actually necessarily happened as much as people think. But the visual idea shows that migration has its flows, and the flow of migration is there by the dots.
Yeah, it's very helpful for students to just flick to a page and just see that. So the chapters themselves are of fairly equal length. We didn't want students to go away with the idea that migration in terms of volume of people coming to Britain was equal throughout the 4 different periods.
Yeah. And it'll not only be a nice way. So the highways happen at the beginning of each section. So it's a nice introduction to what's going to come, but also it's a great revision tool that they can, obviously then they can start to draw their own. They can actually start to think of their own ways of conveying those changes.